Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Welcome to the Performance Matters podcast from GP Strategies, your workforce transformation partner. In each episode, we'll interview industry experts and explore best practices and innovative insights to help your organization improve performance. Hello and welcome to the Performance Matters podcast, sponsored by your workforce transformation partners at GP Strategies. Now, I am your host, Michael Teal, and I'm a creative director within the innovation team here at GP Strategies. And I have to say that today is a day I've had circled on my calendar for quite some time. In the virtual studio, we have a luminary in the leadership, coaching, and talent development world, Mr. Kevin Wilde, author of the recently released book, Coachability, the Leadership Superpower. Kevin, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for the intro.
Now, the thing what we wanted to really share today with our listening audience is really the unique element and aspect of your book is you've got this focus on really what I would consider to be an underserved area of leadership. And that is the idea that one's coachability or level of coachability is really their superpower, correct?
Absolutely. And again, that's the title of the book, Coachability, the Leadership Superpower. And given my 34-year corporate career, helping leaders get better, I started noticing those that really improved had kept their coachability, and those that lost their coachability sometimes got into trouble. And that led me down the path to, gee, why don't we talk about this more? And the book is kind of a very simple guide on, hey, here's what I found, and here's some advice on what to do.
Yeah, and that was one of the things I really noticed on your book is you really even point out the fact that, books that have attempted to be written about this aren't rated so high on the bestsellers list, are they?
Again, there's a lot of great stuff out there on leadership, so we'll start there. And again, I've got the library full of it. And at the end of the day, as much as I continue to try to offer things. I'm a student. I love learning, and I don't come here to be the expert, but more, we don't talk about this as much. And I'll give you a very simple little exercise that's in the book. As I was doing the research, both any book on feedback or related topics, not that popular. I said, I think I'll write one. But if you go to Google, Google Trends, you can put in two search terms. And in the research, I put in two search terms, how to give feedback and then how to receive feedback. And the ratio was astounding, 10-1. So for every 10 people out there saying, I want to give Michael some feedback, how do I do it right? There's only one person saying, yeah, I want to learn how to, get it better. And, I get that giving is hard. But if the other side were a little more receptive or practiced, it would go a lot easier. And that's part of the intent of the book, is try to balance that out again.
I know that you didn't just go on Wikipedia and start researching this. This is born of decades and decades of practical application. So is it okay before we start getting into the book that we just sort of unpack your career and some of your experiences?
Got it.
Okay. All right. So Kevin, you are currently an executive leadership fellow at the Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota. What are you doing there? What's your areas of focus?
Yeah. And the setup for that is I did have a lovely and fortunate 34-year corporate career in talent development. We'll talk about that. But I started thinking about what's the next chapter of life. I thought, I'd love to go back to teaching, and my hobby topic is leadership. And so right now I'm involved in a couple programs, executive MBA program, the graduate program for supply chain in leadership applications of leadership. So been doing that for over 7 years now. And then partnering with some professors on research on these topics about career derailment, what I now call coachability. So I've got that going on, but I find that teaching is inspirational, but I also do the one-on-one coaching with these executive MBA students and learn a lot through that as well.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, you had a 34-year career. You're giving back at this point. Now I know you're probably far too humble to just rattle this off when you meet somebody, but I'd like to actually, in the back of your book about the author, there's a section that really unpacks your time within your corporate career. Is it okay if I just read a little bit and do my best NPR?
Sure. Now, I know that my mom wrote that, so not too many exaggerations. But
okay. Well, the thing I really liked in your book is you said you had a 34-year career with the Generals, and I put that as quotes. So you began your time with General Electric and then had 17 years with General Mills, maker of some of my favorite cereals, by the way. So some fantastic stuff there. Kevin, you were ultimately the chief learning officer at General Mills. And I just want to read this out to the group here. During his time at General Mills, the organization was consistently recognized for its innovative development work, highlighted by Fortune's #2 ranking as one of the best companies in the world at leadership development, #1 listing by Leadership Excellence magazine, #1 global learning elite ranking, and Training Magazine's Hall of Fame designation as a top company for employee development. And if we're not just going to pile on even more, in 2007, Chief Learning Officer magazine selected Kevin as the Chief Learning Officer or CLO of the year. So I kind of feel like I'm talking to the Tiger Woods of leadership and talent development here, or if not there, you're in the Hall of Fame, Kevin. So that's a pretty impressive body of work, sir.
Yeah, it was great stuff, and obviously the stuff you put in a book about, hey, maybe this author's got something to say. But ultimately, let's make it clear: I'm a student of the game of leadership. There's so much to learn, and both, there's a few stories in the book about where Kevin screwed up.
Yes, I particularly appreciated those.
Yeah, no, there's plenty more that I kept out. Trust me, but it's been a great career. And I know that I was surrounded by a lot of great talent and a lot of role model leaders, and both. I had the honor of working at the GE Corporate Training Center at the time called Crotonville. I had the CEO and senior team come in to be teaching faculty in my classes, and that got me into leaders teaching leaders. And then also at General Mills, just a terrific set of leaders that I worked with, as well as outside consultants and friends at GP Strategies, among others.
I was going to say, and that would be the last piece. I would say, for full disclosure, Kevin is on the advisory board of GP Strategies Learning Technologies Group. We're lucky to have him as a guiding consultant on that end. And so, we're going to get into the book. One thing I've been doing this year, kind of as a bit of a theme, though, Kevin, is also introducing our audience to one fun fact about our guest. So do you have one fun fact about Kevin Wilde for us?
Yeah. I love, as much as I live in the woods of Minnesota, I love sneaking out and getting to Arizona, usually a couple times a year, and hiking through the Grand Canyon. And there's a rock at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. I love just finding that rock, sitting on it, and just thinking about life for a few minutes. So that's my happy spot. And I'm going in a couple of weeks, so I'm looking forward to that trip.
I was going to say, maybe we'll have to get down here and go to Applebee's or something and grab a little jalapeno popper and have a good time. So we'll talk about that afterwards.
Okay.
So literally, I have a whole manifest of questions I want to ask you about this book. It's such a rare opportunity to actually get a chance to get behind the words and talk to the author here. So I think the first thing I want to do is really just kind of talk about this concept here of why should leaders care about coachability? And, one of the things I would say in your book is that you said this kind of started out as a study first on just derailing leaders. Why do leaders derail? And you found a pattern. So can you talk a little bit more about that, Kevin?
Yeah, here's the story. So I would meet every year with the senior team in my old job, CEO, et cetera. And we'd talk about the top 500 leaders, all the officers, all the directors worldwide, and really just a terrific group of talent. Who gets promotion, who should we move, training, et cetera. And I started noticing, not everybody makes it. And there was this very small set of derailed leaders that we thought were going to do great and didn't, got over their heads. And in many cases, we had asked them to leave. And I started studying that from that's kind of something we should avoid. Let's go look at that. And it was a very uncomfortable conversation to bring into the senior team to talk about, hey, we got to avoid this. Let's start looking at it. And I found them to be more receptive than my fears. Like, okay, we're going to work on this a bit. So as much as we were working on success profiles, I started doing a deep dive and actually a postmortem on anything that went wrong with a derailment. Would interview their manager, would pull their personnel file, look at things. And I found a clear pattern. In fact, I found one question that in their 360 survey of record that almost predicted the derailment. I don't know if you want to know the question or not, but
I do want to know it. Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
So the question was, does this leader seek and respond to feedback? Does this leader seek and respond to feedback? They were 30% lower compared to my
30%. Wow.
30% lower than the normal group. And that led me about, well, what was going on there? And I think what's going on is they developed blind spots. We all have blind spots, let's admit that. But these people had blind spots in really important areas that led to problems. And that started me down the path about, Why do leaders lose the interest in getting feedback or active in that process? And then how do you turn it around? And as I looked at another study we did, the firm that did our 360s, they had a database of 50,000 leaders, not derail leaders, all leaders worldwide, all levels, all of that. And we said, let's take this coachability set of questions that Kevin found, like, seeks feedback, and play it by level. And what we found is this stunning decline from entry-level supervisor, 71% positive. Yep, love getting feedback, want to learn, want to get better, to by time you got to a senior leader, it was well under 50%. Like, oh, now I see what's going on. And I think there's some assumptions behind that. We did, by the way, find highly coachable leaders at all level. And so point number one is, Michael, coachability helps you avoid blind spots. Sometimes you can get in trouble if you have blind spots and you don't know when they're chasing you. So watch out for that. But I also found that highly coachable leaders, again, number of studies academically and others, we found that highly coachable leaders at all levels, better levels of employee engagement, higher overall leadership rankings, innovation, creativity, influence, on and on and on, higher performance ratings. And I'll get this one, 2 studies that looked at coachability and promotability. And yes, of course, they were 20% higher in ratings if you were highly coachable. So lots of good things that go on if you stay highly coachable. But I think both Mother Nature and our own assumptions get in the way. And so the second thing is lots of positives if you stay coachable. But here's what I tell my class, unless you really think about this topic and do something, today is as coachable as you're ever going to be for the rest of your life, unless you do something. And got a few ideas.
That's a sobering thought. So what I want to do is transition this over to the second biggest milestone I had for today's conversation is why is that? Why do you start out an open book, open to feedback? Why do you start to lose that over time, particularly as you ascend into more of a leadership position? What did you find on that?
So back to the studies as well as the coaching I've done, I found a number of things that we can all identify with. One is, I call it the false finish line. And that's the notion about, hey, I'm now the leader. I'm in charge. I don't have to learn as much. I have to do stuff. And I think that's a notion that I'm now perfectly formed or I'm done with my development, as opposed to the highly coachable leaders that have a mindset about, you know what, I'm an unfinished product. I got to keep working on this leadership game. And so that false finish line assumption gets in the way. Related to that is what I call the superhuman stance, which is, now that I'm the leader, if I ask for feedback, people will doubt me. Like, I better not ask.
He doesn't have all the answers, right? Oh my goodness.
I've got to show. That's that heroic leadership model. And particularly, you think about the challenges of the COVID and the economy, that we need leaders to step up, show the way, rally the troops. That's all good. But if you're not coachable as you're going through that, you get into trouble. And I think that one. The third one I've seen is, like, it's a funny one. It's called the boss booster bubble. And I don't know if you've noticed it, but oftentimes when you're in charge, when you have power, people start filtering what they tell you. And they learn, gee, for my own career interests, I'm going to tell Michael good news. He's happy. I'm not going to tell him the bad news, especially about himself. And most leaders know, like, look, there's 2 sides to the story. But some people get caught in the trap about, all I'm hearing is good news. Nobody comes in my office and tells me what I need to work on, so I must be okay. And then there's the other dynamic I'll mention is the what I call the lonely lament, that I notice the higher up you go up the ladder of leadership, the less you've got a peer group. And if you think about our earlier years, peer groups are always, comparing notes, talking to each other, giving each other advice and looking for it. And so you've got that natural learning group when you're a frontline employee, when you're a supervisor, when you've got your friends. And then as you get in charge of things, there's not that many around. And that gets in the way. I'll mention one more, if I may, which is probably the heart of things.
Keep it going. I am not going to stop you
there's
here.
a lot
I am absorbing this.
The other one is, like, you know what? I'll go through seminars or training, even reading my book on coachability, and people say, you know what, I buy this concept. I don't want blind spots. I want to do all the good things you talked about, but not now. I'm really, really busy. I'm going to put that on my list when things slow down. And I call that the magic moment mirage. Like, okay, things are going to slow down at some point. I'm going to work on my own development. Like, boy, you tell me the day things slow down. We get busy. And I think the busyness sometimes gets in the way about stepping back. How am I doing? What should I listen to? What should I be working on now? And we all suffer with that. And I just find that what I tried to do in the book is find little tips, little things, and even for your viewers here and listeners, like what's like one thing that could add to my game 10% better, one little thing I can bring in to my coachability. But a lot of things
Yeah,
get in the
and
way. A lot of things get in the way.
it's funny, being that I'm in my late 40s now, not to date this too much, but I can see the hill, if not I can see the hill going on the other side at this point. But everything you're saying right there is, I go back and I can play back my career in my mind, and whether it's with myself or with others, I've withheld information. I've helped contribute to the lonely lament
Yeah.
in pursuit of keeping my career standing before. And I've been on the other end where I've been at the leadership level and not really gotten the candid feedback until it's maybe like a blind 360 survey, which you talk about later in the book. And I just loved your Sarah acronym there. I was just dying on the plane writing notes about that. I've gone through all those stages at some point. So really good stuff. What I want to do though, for our listeners here that are driving and listening, is let's talk about some things that we can do about it. So in this idea of regaining your coachability, before we get into some of the specifics, tell us about what's a big picture mind frame that we can adopt to just start to regain our coachability, Kevin.
And some of my research was I interviewed 50 executive coaches. When you have a coachable client, what do you see as a leader? When they don't, what's missing? And then put a model together, went out, did the academic research on it, got it down to, the 5 simple factors. The biggest one is obviously mindset, getting back to like, you know what, I value this. I do want to get better. As opposed to I'm so busy, I got to work on this later, or, I dismiss any feedback because we have to charge that hill. So one last study I want to mention that really set this up. So again, the 360 firm, good partners in the work I've done over the years, Zenger Folkman, they did a study of 300 leaders. We cut the coachability index of how people see how coachable that leader is against confidence. They had a personality assessment. And so the question is, what happens to coachability as your confidence goes up? And what was surprising is it wasn't up or down. It was a curve. And on the low end, it's like, okay, low confidence, low coachability. I call that I can't. And I've been there myself. Like, I just can't take feedback right now. I'm nervous. I don't know if I'm doing it right, but I'm just not ready for it. And therefore, you have to get a little more confidence to be coachable. On the other end is I have lots of confidence. Particularly, I looked at some of the academic studies on, humility and all of that. But I call that the I don't care zone. And we fall into that too. It's like, you know what? I don't want it because I don't care.
You are preaching. Choirs of angels are coming down here. I see all these with various leaders in my life already, Kevin.
But for all of us, one thing I ask leaders is, okay, there's that middle spot. There's that sweet spot where, again, it was much higher coachability when you had enough confidence to listen and to try and to learn, but not too much. And I call that the learning zone. So the biggest thing is I found leaders had that mindset. I want to operate more in my learning zone. Now, I did some training for a company recently, and I asked leaders, what % of your calendar time in the last month were you operating from your learning zone? Were you leading from your learning zone? Less than 25%. They're saying 75% of my time, I'm executing, I'm moving. I am not in my learning zone either because I don't want to hear it because I don't care, or I don't want to hear it because I'm not ready for it. And I'd say, gee, for you to achieve your goals, to be in this crazy environment and to lead well and be your best, what % of your time should you be in your operating zone? And I think for your viewers and listeners, like, that's the fundamental question. Can I operate more in my learning zone? What pushes me out of it? And what pulls me into it? And what I found pulls people into it are these little habits that highly coachable leaders use.
Okay, so before we get there, and I'm seeing some things here, I want to just unpack this learning zone a little bit more. So what I'm seeing in my mind is kind of that XY axis, right? So you've got an X axis and a Y axis. And you were saying to really be in your learning zone, you need to have a reasonable amount of confidence, but also a reasonable amount of coachability. Is that fair to say?
Right. Okay. So I just drew on the
Okay.
whiteboard.
Yeah. Okay. Let's draw it up here. Let's see it.
That's
Okay.
That's the curve, right? And again,
Okay. You should be an artist too, by the way. That's really, really good.
I've got another
That's
career.
what you call lonely lament right there. That was
No, that's the boss booster bubble. Like, no, I'm not really that
Oh,
good.
that's the booster bubble.
There you
Okay,
go.
yeah,
But
right.
again, the
Okay.
spots in the middle. And again,
All right. So
enough
if you're
confidence.
listening on the podcast, this is also going to be on our YouTube channel on GP Strategies. Like, subscribe, smash that notifications button. You can see Kevin's graph there, by the way. So, okay. So Kevin, that's where you want to stay. Continue on. Forgive me for interrupting you with that sidebar promo.
Yeah, and I just mentioned about, where I would start with, okay, do I want to operate more in my learning zone? Is that going to help me be a better leader, avoid blind spots, role model, great coaching yourself, as well as, engagements. And so good things happen. And the notion about, I probably drifted out of my learning zone. Michael, the bad news is we also cut the data, 50,000 leaders in coachability by age.
Okay.
Guess what that looks like?
Oh,
down.
I was going to say, I was thinking of a descending chart, right?
Really
the older you are, that's the old dogs. It's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, right?
And some of that is, by the way, we've earned a certain amount of, I know what I'm doing. I've achieved. I've got my success formulas. I want to use it. I think that's all legitimate. But how do you both, do what you do well, but also that keep that learning zone mode open? And what I found in my research is there's two kinds of coachable leaders. Those that are coachable on anything. I call those universal coachabilities, right? Any topic, anytime, give me a tip, I'm ready for it. And then there are the on mission coachable people, which are, you know what, I don't want feedback on everything right now, but here's the one thing important in my life, important in my organization leadership. I want to learn how to get better at this thing. And the door is open for feedback, or I want input from folks. And back to that, I want to be in the learning zone. If possible, all the time, but particularly on these things. So having something, I really want to be in my learning zone. And then what helps me get there and how to
within that layer of coachability, is there one that you would say is the mindset that is preferred? Universal or on mission?
Yeah, I think the notion about I'm an unfinished product.
Okay, the work in progress, right?
I'm work in progress. Yeah, and back to this confidence thing. You should feel confident, but not confident to care, confident to be able to take input. By the way, we can get in this in a minute. You're like, I do not like the word feedback. I got a problem with that word. I try not to use it in the book. We'll come back to that. But
I think I know where you're going with that, and I loved it. We need a director's chair here, but okay, so. I am loving everything that you're saying about coachability, the mindset of it. And I'm hearing you almost saying that it's not, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. It's more of just shift your mindset, shift your approach. And when you make that decision, some doors open up. So I think we've hopefully our listeners are beginning to believe that. What I'd like to do, though, is really talk about some of the 4 ways. So you really highlight 4 actionable ways. And I will say this as someone that read the book, Kevin's book is, as he's mentioned, it's not designed for folks that read business books. It's for people that don't. Is that fair to say, Kevin?
Yeah, I wrote it as a pass-along book. That and short attention span. Let me just, if you skim through the book, like I got it, and I put worksheets in there, like, yeah, that's the thing I need.
Oh yeah.
So simple, fun. I have pictures. I have pictures in there. Most business books don't have pictures. I have pictures.
Oh my goodness. So I was going to say this, first of all, just from someone operating in the world of learning and development, where we know long form blocks of text just don't work anymore. You really nailed it. You really hit in a couple things. I want to just say that I loved is you have this 3-2-1 summary at the end where you talk about the 3 key concepts, 2 questions, 1 action item. I mean, I just went, okay, this has been done by someone that's thinking about how we process and retain information, where you can do a high level skim, you can look at it, and then you have all these worksheets and action items where it gets down to where we really learn, and that's analysis and reflection and synthesis and how we do all this. So just want to give you a virtual high five for that. You did a fantastic job, Kevin. Hey, let's do a virtual high five. There we go. Boom. Yep. You did such a great job. And one of I'd say the bulk of the second half of the book is really just about how to do things. You make a powerful case for being coachable and this concept of the learning zone. And then you shift it to really specifically what you can do about it. So you highlighted 4 key ways to regain your superpower. Are you okay? I don't want to read the book for everyone here, but can you just unpack a little bit of
Sure.
these 4 concepts for us?
Yeah. And the promise
Okay.
about, okay, here's, if you're listening to this while you're driving or whatnot, or getting ready for your day, like do one of these things. So again, studied highly coachable leaders, did the academic review. By the way, lots of stories and, as you mentioned, worksheets, but also in the back of the book, I have all the academic references. So for the leadership nerds out there like me, like, if you want to look at the work of Dr. Susan Ashford, fabulous job on feedback seeking, et cetera, et cetera. I've got all of that in the back, including my favorite study, 300 leaders that matched their employees and the manager, and they measured the manager and how coaching skills the manager had and how coachable the employee was. And they found that the coachability employee mattered even more. Like, yeah, this is the back.
Really?
That's all in the back. It's all in the back of the book. But tip number 1, highly coachable leaders, find ways to seek input.
Okay.
And, I'll give you just two ideas here. One is they have a question, back to in your learning zone on a question, like, what would be your question you want to learn from? I love back in my working days. Yeah, this is seek. Is to seek by, the after action review. You finish a project, you're wrapping up a meeting, and you just ask 2 questions. You say, number 1, what did I do well I should do again? And what's one thing I could do differently next time? That would be even better. And I've learned that in my own career is just have that simple question or 2 in your back pocket, find ways of bringing it up. Now, the first time or 2 you ask it, people will probably be a little, tenuous on how they answer, but over time, like, hey, I found with my team, I would do one-on-ones, and oftentimes I would add that question at the end. Trust me, by the end, my team was loaded. They were ready to give Kevin feedback.
They were ready.
They
well,
were
that's
ready.
well,
Like,
the point
okay,
is, you said I want to get better, right? You said I'm a work in progress, and that opens the door. In fact, the 2 questions concept, I immediately wrote that down, because whether it's podcast hosting, or as you mentioned, you had to learn how to have your media training, and you didn't receive formal, you did more of an OTJ concept. So I wrote that down as a huge one of just seeking. And you outlined several things. I don't want to make this a 15-hour podcast, but you outline a lot of different ways that you can take this nuanced idea of seeking feedback, and you unpack it in the book. So I think that's awesome.
I'll try to give 2 for each. So that's one. And again, there's a lot in there, simple things. The other one is on more senior levels. Oftentimes you get your feedback by having a truth teller. And, my truth teller story. Okay, so I was a frontline supervisor, manufacturing at GE, and this is way back in the day. The second week on the job, I had to pass out paychecks. We didn't have direct deposit, and so I had 34 technicians, 2 shifts, and I'd go from assembly station to assembly station. I'd give them the paycheck. I thought, this is boring. I'm going to spice it up. So I made a little joke. I'd say, hey, Michael, here's your paycheck, big money. Or, hey, Susan, got your paycheck here. Don't spend it all at once. And I thought I was hilarious. So I'm going around the shop, giving out the paychecks. I get back to my little supervisor cubicle, and there sitting there is my lead technician, Jim. And Jim said, Kevin, sit down. Okay. And he said, we've been talking, and I think you're going to be okay as the new boss, but I got to tell you, when you pass out paychecks, shut up. And he meant it, in a very caring way, but like, I'm sorry, I had no idea. Boy, that was a blind spot. I had to apologize, and I never did again. But then I just started thinking, if Jim wouldn't have told me, I would have done that stupid comedy act every other week, and my workforce would be grumbling under their breaths, and it just would be bad. So Jim was my truth teller. So I think about, in every job since, I've always sought out a truth teller. Say, hey, how am I doing? What's going on? What should I pay attention to now? If you were me, what would be the important thing? And have those truth tellers in your life. So simple exercise, write it down. Who are your 2 or 3 truth tellers right now? How do you build those relationships? How do you check in?
With that, Kevin, with a truth teller, does it have to be someone who is quote unquote above you as a supervisor? Is that a helpful element, or is it helpful to have people within the entire mix?
I'll give you a 360. So, write it down, like who works for me, or who's at the lower level that, is capable, trustworthy, and we've got the chemistry that I could ask them every once in a while, how am I doing, and how's the team doing, et cetera. Peers are a great source too. When I worked at General Mills, I had to find kind of a cultural interpreter. Like, these people are crazy. Why are we doing these things this way? And I joined the new company, and they had a compensation. I would go for a run every once in a while, and he was my truth teller. Hey, Kevin, here's what's going on, and by the way, here's what you're doing right now, et cetera. So a peer would be good. I think looking up is good. Oftentimes a more senior person, but not your direct chain of command, but related. And I had truth
Okay.
tellers at those levels I would build. I'd look at your calendar and say, okay, who have I been meeting with in the last month, or who am I meeting with in the next month? That could be one of my trusted advisors or truth tellers, the people I could check in with. So you could go all around. You go to the outside. There's great coaches out there. There's old peers. I had an old boss from 10 years prior. That was one of my check-in guys. And then finally, do things to show that your door is open. And that's, as much as I just said, 5 ways you can find a truth teller, I think we can lead in such a way that truth tellers find us. And mentioning in meetings, I'm always trying to learn, or I'm open, or boy, I'm really curious about this thing right now. And then we're going to segue into the second thing. I found highly coachable leaders, when they get input, respond in a certain way. And I have to admit, this is where I don't like the word feedback. Because if I say to most people, hey, I've got feedback for you, nobody jumps up and down for joy.
Your book has many ways to respond to that. And I like the fact that you go from seeking to respond, and unpack this idea of respond for me, because respond isn't, in my mind, respond is going, I'm truly responding, but you've got some great approaches there. Can you share a couple of best practices?
Yeah. And again, you think of mindset early in our career. Yeah, we knew we had to learn. So we responded quite naturally. Our faces, all that was all good. All these busy things and the assumptions that get in the way. I find that, and this comes from the book, Thank You for the Feedback. They talk about the inner voices that get in the way of really listening. And what I find is you've got to build some muscle memory. And how do I respond? It's like an NFL athlete, like, you know what? You better have practiced the play before the play happens. And most of us don't. And so the one thing that I learned about highly coachable leaders is they don't listen to the inner voices. One inner voice that gets in my way is when someone gives me input. My inner voice says, don't listen, Kevin, because they don't understand. They don't get it. They're not smart enough. They got their own agenda, on and on and on and on. By the way, some of those things may be true, but if the inner voice is too noisy, I never listen to what might be a good message. And then the second one, Michael, is great. So the second little voice I get when someone gives me, ideas and input to improve is the little voice says, oh, you're giving me feedback? Me? Well, tell me when you're done talking, because I have some feedback for you. And maybe they need feedback, but not right then. And again, there's dozens of other voices, but you kind of get it about these little things that get in the way.
Well, I think that's the key point and the aha moment for me on this element of respond is this idea, as you said, you need to train yourself to, number one, understand at the meta level, what are your instinctual feelings? And as you were saying, it's a lot of it is you start to rationalize, or like you said, you have a bit of an indignancy. And first of all, just recognizing, hey, that's how I'm feeling. But as you said, let's put those aside. And it takes practice to do that, right?
It does. And back to how do I get myself into the learning zone? I've either asked for feedback input, or it's just coming my way from a truth teller. I got to get it. I need to capture the message. And the best way I know how to do that was a friend of mine that's a professional actor. And he said that we were talking about these concepts. And he said, oh, that's like taking a note. I said, what do you mean taking a note? And what I found in my research is professional actors are on stage in a rehearsal, but they don't leave when the rehearsal's over. They stay on stage, and the director gives each of them a note. Like, here's my note for you. Because the director can see the whole stage. They can see the body language. They can see how lines are landing. And professional actors learn to take a note. And so I've learned to use that phrase. Like, okay, here comes some input from Michael and others. Like, you know what? I got to listen. I'm just taking a note. So you need kind of a trigger phrase that puts you in the listening mode to the outside message, not the inside noise. And another one I use is, oh, here comes my tip of the day. I get that at home. Like, hey, Kevin, blah, 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 blah. Here comes my tip of the day. And I just want to listen and, say, thank you. It's hard to give feedback. I also tell people I coach, like, it's okay to say, I want to think about this. Thank you for the input.
Yeah. Okay. That was huge. That was huge hearing that. And as you say in the book, stop listening, start taking notes. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, I'm just taking a note and back to that's the mindset. Highly coachable leaders, I just want to listen to the message. Because even if, back to they may not be that credible, or they may not, know what's going on, or they got their own faults, but there might be something in that message that's going to help you. That points out the blind spot, or the hidden strength or talent that you should bring out more. But you've got to have that muscle memory about, here it comes. I've got to get into a capture the message mode. And if I'm a role model leader, I have to show the kind of coachability I expect of my employees. And here's the other thing. Highly coachable leaders are rated as better coaches. Why? I think they role model it.
Absolutely. Well, I can see if you are saying I'm an open book, I'm a work in progress, I'm looking to stay curious, I'm looking to consistently improve, you're setting up a culture, right? So then you're essentially setting up a water wheel of success at your organization here. And I will say this as a slight promo for the book. We do have a graphic. If you want to check out the video on YouTube, we've got a graphic that shows at least one place that you can purchase the book. You can snap a QR code and go to Amazon. It's also available at, I believe, Barnes and Noble and a couple of other storefronts too, Kevin. But I want to say in the book, you also have all these fantastic worksheets that are reflection worksheets in terms of how you can take this idea and really start to work on it. So I just want to say kudos for that. You did a great job on those elements. So I want to move us on to this idea of reflections. And in fact, one of the things that you just mentioned is that it's okay when you're taking your note to say, number one, I know this was hard for you, right? Thank you for sharing this feedback. I'm just going to need to take some time to reflect on that, right? Mm-hmm. And that kind of takes us to point 3 of one of your best practices. So share a couple tips and insights when you are reflecting on how to make the most of the notes that you've been given.
Yeah, what I've found is it's really hard to reflect nowadays, right? We got a lot going on, and the notion, okay, I'm separating, like, highly coachable leaders value being in the learning zone. They actively seek input to get better or open for it. They, respond well when it shows up. They understand what the message is, and then they have to think about it. Like, okay, have I heard this before? Is this something important to act on? Should I check with some other people? But they take the time. Now, it could be as simple as, I'm going to think about this as I'm writing in my journal that night, or I'm going to go talk to a friend about it. I find that there's a clear division of introverts and extroverts. If you're mainly an extrovert, it's going to be too painful to write it down, but go talk to someone like, hey, I just got this input. I don't know what to make out of it. Can we talk about it? I think that's valuable to do. Or, if you're an introvert, like, okay, write in the journal, go for a walk, think about it. I've got some worksheets to think it through on the bigger feedback messages. But I want to step back for a second. As much as, we're trying to say, how do I get a message, and really reflect on it. I think we've lost the habit of reflecting. I think the last couple of years have gotten us crazy busy, and, who knows what's coming next, but love agility, love the, we're going to make it up as we go along. But I think it's gotten us sloppy for leaders that do need to, as one of the Harvard professors, Ron Heifetz, talks about in one of his books, leaders need to, from time to time, get off the dance floor, get up to the balcony, see what's going on, and then go back down. And I think we don't get up on we don't take that higher view of things. And if you're a leader, you are paid to look to the future, to figure out what's going on. And it takes think time. We've lost a lot of that. So I've got a friend, Nigel Payne, that has got a couple books out. And he talks about, 5 minutes a day. Come on, 5 minutes a day.
5 minutes,
that's end of the day. Come on, 5 minutes. This is my reflecting time. I'm going to turn off the phone. I'm going to whatnot. I'm just going to think. Did I hear anything today? What's got my attention now? What's the question I should be mulling over? 5 minutes a day. Or at the beginning of the day, all right, how do I want to show up today? Given the feedback I've gotten or the thing I'm working on improving it, look at those meetings on your calendar. How do I want to show up today? 5 minutes. And then he'd recommend, end of the week. I like Friday mornings, by the way, 15 minutes in your calendar, 15 minutes. Reflect time. Now, usually that means a different location, by the way. Because, if you're just in front of all the noise and distractions, 15 minutes are hard. So 5 minutes a day, 15 minutes, then from time to time, a little more. But I think highly coachable leaders and effective leaders have reflect time. And we got to fight to get it back. And does that mean that maybe not your emails are all addressed that day, or, your 20 tasks, you only got 15 done? Yeah. You'll be better if you reflect. So challenge to all the readers and myself.
Absolutely. I loved your story in the book about how one of your senior executives that you went to, you thought he had a stroke. And I won't ruin the story for everyone, spoiler alert, but the fact is he was reflecting and you're like, what's going on here? And that idea of just having the quiet time. In fact, that's one of the things that I took away as one of my ideas, was just setting up some of these activators, these triggers that can help you make some of these best practices. So I will 100% do the 5, 15, and 1 hour that you recommend, because I just went, that's a perfect way to just, even as you said, hey, am I showing kindness to others? Just at a base level, forget performance. Am I just reflecting the values that I want to have people remember me from? I think those are really great things, not only for work, but for your family, for your marriage. You could go a lot of ways here. So we'll keep it on the workforce front on this end. So let's step back to the next element. The fourth piece was action or acting right here. So just share a couple of tips and strategies beyond what we've already talked about, Kevin.
Yeah. So back to I've reflected, I do need to make an adjustment. I need to flex my style. I started studying leaders that translate feedback and intention into real action. Because again, it's not sustainable if I keep giving you input and you never change, or you change once and then you fall back. Now, the field of self-improvement and self-change is just huge. But I kind of did a deep dive, and I started following my exec MBA students that would put a development plan together. We'd do a resurvey in 4 months. Did this leader get better or not? And I started watching those that really improved. And I found a couple patterns. One pattern I found is when they decided, I got to change this, right? I need to add this to my game or flex my style, is they went into it with a spirit of experimentation. Like, I'm going to try this. So one question about, once I got the feedback, I want to get better at something. Where can I experiment? Where can I try it and just see how it goes in those little places? So that, what's that simple step I could take? So back to reflection is, okay, if I want to act, what's the simple step I could start with? I know my personal life at one point, I was getting exercising and then getting really tight. Like, I gotta get yoga, right? And I just set a goal about, every day I'm going to do a little yoga thing, but at minimum, I'm going to do at least one yoga pose a day. And just a little, get you going on it, a little, 5 minutes reflection, or, check in from little starts. A couple of things I saw that I passed along from people that were successful at acting at their intention to get better is they wrote it down and they reminded themselves. And
so that's going back to the whole concept of habits, correct?
Yeah. So back to the, I found that the people would put it on a little Post-it note card and they'd put it somewhere, or they'd put it on a screensaver, or, they'd put it on their agendas, right? Remember, Kevin, you're working on this bump, or here's when I'm at my best, what I'm looking like. But the most successful people in acting actually wrote it down, reminded themselves, and got into a routine about, oh yeah, because we get busy, we forget, it's about, put it in front of yourself naturally. And here's the other tip is, this will be shocking. So I'm glad you're sitting down. Hopefully most of your readers are sitting down. People that made significant progress told someone what they were working on. They told someone.
Yes.
So again, could be a trusted advisor, could be a friend, could be whatnot. And I think that public acknowledgement about, I want to be more concise when I speak, or I don't want to interrupt people and whatnot, is one, I think the articulation helps the commitment. And two, have a support, a little accountability, a little friend.
Right, so you're getting a truth teller is what you're getting. You're soliciting truth tellers is what you're saying, right?
Yep. So a couple simple things, but again, to your point about a number of activators I've got in the book, I found that there's like a dozen things you can do to set yourself into motion. And the unsuccessful people picked one or two. The successful leaders had at minimum 5 different little ways to kind of keep them on that journey. Again, personal change is hard. I get it. But again, if you're in that learning mode, like, I need to take a couple steps, 10% better. What's a habit I could use today? And then rally some support and reminders around you.
Absolutely. Yeah. In particular, I appreciated your case studies of actually sharing. Obviously, you changed the names to protect the innocent, but you shared specific case studies of, for example, one of your students that is currently in business, and they were trying to launch a software product, and you actually shared how she incorporated the 5 tips and made meaningful changes. So there's a lot of actionable elements in your book in that regard. So it's chock full, and I'm quite impressed how you were able to get so much information condensed in a book that I could read within a 4-hour sitting on a flight to Cleveland while being bumped around whilst taking notes. So great job on that. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is I'm going to call this kind of the art and science of things here, Kevin, and
Mhm.
that is you're going to get feedback, or you're taking notes is what I probably should change this to. You're going to receive notes from individuals. There's got to be a fine art as a leader of determining what feedback you're going to actually act upon and what you're not. What I'd like to hear a little bit more from you on is, number one, how do you determine making those decisions? And B, regardless of that, what do you say to individuals that have shared notes with you?
Yeah. So back to that final point about if anybody's giving you that kind of input, it is an act of courage and kindness. And even if it's a tough message or it's a messy one, as one author once said, all feedback is a gift, but oftentimes it's poorly wrapped, and you've got to get through the ugly wrapping to get at the okay, what's the nugget here? At the very least, you're role modeling listening, right? But
Yes.
how do you unpack it? And again, what I find some people reflect by journaling or taking notes. I'm trying to do kind of a little journal entry a day, and then you go back and you see some patterns like, oh, I remember getting coached from one of my former bosses, and I said, I'm struggling with this input. And he said, Kevin, don't you remember? We talked about this 10 years ago. Like, oh. So you start making connections of things. So as you do get input, consider it data.
Okay.
Model well when you receive it. All right, is this a pattern here? Am I clear on what the message is? Sometimes you've got to validate it, check with some others, or, find some other ways. Okay, is this something really important that I need to work on now? Or just I need to note it. I think it's okay to note it, and again, journals or whatnot. And then, circumstances change. So I just want to remind leaders that oftentimes when you're in a different organization, different level, or, the plans change, that what wasn't important becomes important. So what might not have been important feedback some time ago, so like, okay, that's critical now. Case in point, I remember in my days, I loved designing learning programs, right? And then I became the chief learning officer, right? So the first day that I had one of my managers come in, we're looking at launching a new manager course, and I started working on a better icebreaker for day 2. And I'm like, that's not your job, Kevin. My job is to make them successful, to give them resources, remove the barrier, blah, blah, blah. Like, I got to stop doing that. Where in the old days, that was something I'd wanted feedback on. Can Kevin make the best icebreakers? So sometimes a transition or a shift in the question would be, is this feedback important to me now? Is this input important to me now or for the future? Talking to a trusted advisor, talking it through, I think is helpful. So one, noting it, looking for patterns. Is there something of value here for me? Would be some ways to start sorting that out.
The idea that you had mentioned there, when you are at different roles, something that kind of like you're saying here might have been a strength could potentially be a blind spot liability if you're not either noting your feedback or you're not seeking that feedback from individuals. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
The sixth thing I wanted to talk about, and you previewed it or presaged it a little bit earlier, is this idea of messy feedback. You said it can be a gift. It can be wrapped like the way I wrap gifts, which is just terrible.
Yeah.
If you ask anyone in my family, they can tell which ones I've wrapped at Christmas time. But my question to you is, why is feedback often so darn messy when people are giving it to us? Why does it feel awkward to give feedback?
Yeah, I mean, back to the original, why are people Googling 10 times the one? How do I give it versus receive it?
Right.
Back to my study, I think we kind of lose that this is not a natural thing anymore. And the highly coachable leaders are in the learning zone, like, yeah, this is part of it. A little story I tell, I had the good fortune to work with a guy named Omar Douglas. He's an executive at Nike, early in the days at General Mills. He used to be an NFL athlete. And I would say, what's it like being a sports guy? And he would talk about, Monday morning after the game, breaking out by the skill group and, looking at the tape and the recording from the game itself. And he told me a story once about arguing with his skills coach about running. And he said, Omar, you're running your routes with your arms up. And he said, no, I'm not. And they said, well, let's go to the tape. And there the poor guy is, running with his arms up. I'm like, oh, there it is. Now, we can't have GoPro cameras on our heads as we're,
Right.
being leaders every day. But that notion about, okay, how do I try to observe or get feedback? And how am I really coming across and doing? And how do I capture that? So, one thing I did in one of the worksheets is just, 3 columns. One column, what are some topics I'd love to learn about? What are some things that really would energize and put me in the learning zone? Just kind of brainstorm like, hey, for this quarter, for the next 90 days, what's a topic or two that, I'd love to learn to get better, particularly a personal.
Okay.
thing,
Yeah.
right?
What are you curious about,
What are you
right?
curious about? What are you curious about? You brainstorm on that. And again, you could talk to a trusted advisor, you look at your calendar, goals, et cetera. And the middle column is, who would I want to get that from? So what are some sources? And again, the
Okay.
manager, client, project leader, and just brainstorm on that one, that either that, okay, I just want to know how am I doing with these peers, or how am I doing with, some of my employees, or it's related to that topic. And the final one is, what's my approach? How do I get the conversation started? And that's a good one to brainstorm. Like, okay, in the next meeting, how do I do the 2-question technique? Or how do I, turn a conversation into, hey, I'd love to get a little bit of mentoring or coaching on this thing in the coming months. Can you help me here? Or I've been through a learning program, and here's my action plan. Can we kind of go through
Right.
it?
Exactly.
Support. I think all those things are helpful.
So Kevin, I wanted to also just kind of mention this idea of, and you mentioned it earlier, is this idea of the magic moment mirage. And I think, so many of us are caught up in this, the old Stephen Covey quadrant 1, quadrant 2. Quadrant 1's the urgent and important. We get so stuck there that we're locked into fighting fires. So I think in this learning development world, many of us are interested in how do we combat that. And you provided lots of great tips and strategies in the book here. But what I'd like you to do is just share one more piece of advice of how we can fight past the tyranny of the urgent.
Yeah. So we all face it, and obviously we're doing our best to tread water right now. And that's the reality. Let's start there. Back to the, how could I be 10% better? And so, if we're starting to wrap up this little broadcast, that's, of all the ideas you heard, just pick one. Just pick one. Maybe two. One was get Kevin's book. Thank you. But the other one
Absolutely.
is,
Oh yeah, that's
hey,
100%.
Here's the one thing I'm going to try. And I think finding little moments to turn an intention into, I'm going to experiment, I'm going to try a little bit. I think that would be the big headline about just pick one thing. Remind yourself every day, every week, the one thing that I'm open to, I'm working on, and get me back to that learning spot I want to be. And then I'll be an advocate for asking the impossible, which is, I think every once in a while we have to get away from it all. Opening story is Kevin hikes the Grand Canyon. One thing he does is he gets down and he sits on a rock, and there's a stream, there's this big rock formation. I just sit there for a while, like, how are things going? And that's my happy spot. And I think we all need to have a happy spot to reflect, to kind of pull away from the noise of the day and all the demands, to reflect, to be at our best, to get re-energized. And so my impossible question is, go find your happy spot. And you got to get there every once in a while, away from the phone, away from the demands of the day. And I think we'll all be better if we get in those regular refuge, these places that give us some calm and peace and allow us to reflect so we can show up better next time.
Such great insight, Kevin. I can't thank you on behalf of our many listeners for taking the time and investing in us today. Now, for those that have heard this, and we want to invite you to pick up his book. I spent my own hard-earned money on it, and I have to say it was money well spent. We've got links to it. Kevin, where else can they find your book?
Back to the online, most online retailers would have it. So again, Barnes and Nobles, Hudson Booksellers, et cetera, and Amazon being the big one out there. But that's a good place. But it's really written. It's simple. It's engaging. I'm sorry if it took you 4 hours to get through it. I wrote it for a short attention span. Back to the Miracle Project. Give me a couple ideas, and I got summaries. I got pictures. I've got little worksheets. Grab something. But that's the book. I also online, thecoachability.com. I'm putting tips and other worksheets and new ideas out there, blogs, et cetera. And then there's also an assessment. One thing I've done is put together a model of what the book's got, a short version of it. But if you want the full self-assessment about how am I doing on the habits of being coachable, you can get that assessment. It costs $49, a little advertising there for it. But what you get is you get a full report, scores on, it's very simple, 10, 15 minutes of an assessment, how your practices compare to 500 leaders with some additional tips. So that's another place if you want to dive deep, we've got that. And then for those of you that are listening that you're in the learning field or the coaching field, the message of coachability is an important one. And I would just leave you with, I think, whether it's a tool or worksheet, the book or whatever else, is, bring that up as you're working with people. Hey, how's your coachability? Are you in your learning zone? How can I help you? And what can you do to keep you in your learning zone? Because I think sometimes as champions of helping other people get better, we take the full responsibility of readiness to learn. And I think we need to do our part. But I think more and more we're overlooking that. No, we've got to help people say, don't go on that downward slide on coachability. How do you keep up your curiosity?
Absolutely. And I would say this, that I think it's a great book that you've essentially built a workshop into a book. So something that a team could have. And as you said, you introduce a lexicon and say, let's talk about the 2 questions now. And you start to use these terms that immediately could be shorthand for triggering all kinds of other things in your mind. You've got so many little lexicon items in here that could end up really benefiting individuals, whether you're a leader, whether you're a follower. And we're obviously, most of us are at some point flipping that switch at the moment by moment of whether you're leading or following or taking direction, or as you're saying, taking notes. So can't thank you enough, Kevin, for your time here. We certainly appreciate it. And so folks, that's our podcast for the day. We'd love it if you'd give us a follow if you're on your podcast suite of your choice, or if you want to check us out on YouTube, we are GP Strategies, the Performance Matters podcast. So on behalf of Kevin and myself, thank you so much and have yourself a wonderful day. The Performance Matters podcast is brought to you by GP Strategies. Together, we can create a world where business excellence makes possibilities achievable. You can subscribe to the show anywhere you get podcasts or listen on our website at gpstrategies.com.